Could you survive 22 days without power? Stick around and we'll get right to it. Real quick, before we get going, I've got to give a shout out to these guys. They're my latest patrons over on Patreon. If you'd like to help support the channel, I'll leave a link to Patreon down in the description below. Hey, welcome back, guys. Jason, KM4ACK. Today, I've got a really cool interview with Dean, K5MPG. He survived 22 days without power after Hurricane Helene. Let's jump to the interview and hear more about his story. Dean, I appreciate you taking a few minutes with us this morning to discuss kind of what it was like to be in North Carolina during and after this storm. So I do appreciate you taking just a few minutes with us this morning.
Well, thank you, Jason. I'm honored to be here. I appreciate you asking me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm kind of curious, in the days leading up to the storm, well, first of all, did anyone in the area expect it to be that bad? And two, did you do anything to kind of prepare for the storm?
So nobody expected this devastation that we had. And it took everybody by surprise. Now, out of just coincidence and getting prepared for winter, the Sunday before the storm, I had taken all my empty gas cans and diesel cans to the gas station after church and filled them up.
Wow.
And it was pure coincidence. At that point in time, I didn't even think that the storm was going to come anywhere near us.
So you have a routine each fall getting ready for winter where you're filling up gas cans, and I'm assuming maybe double checking your generator to make sure everything's functioning correctly?
Yeah, filling up gas cans, generators, checking antifreeze in the vehicles, checking, changing oil in the generators and that sort of thing.
Okay. So it sounds like a pretty good routine to have each fall. And it definitely paid off in this case.
Oh, no doubt, because, the storms are going to come and the snow is going to fall. And we live in Green Mountain, in the Appalachian Mountains, and trees up here that grow on the side of a mountain, people don't realize that they don't have a deep root base because they're growing on rock.
Okay.
So when we have high winds and a lot of rain, trees come down, so the power goes out fairly frequently. But kudos to French Broad Electric. They are very quick to get it back up and running, and nobody expected to have power back up this soon. We were thinking it was going to be January and just hoping that it would be sooner, and it was 22 days for us.
Wow. So you guys were told initially then to expect January before you had power back?
French Broad didn't give us any idea of how long it was going to take. What they did do, and they continue to do, was give a daily update on the progress they were making.
Okay.
Yeah. There's no way that they could have. There's no way they could have guessed how long the power was going to be out or how long it was going to take to restore.
So, but power outages are kind of normal in your area. Then I'm taking it from what you're telling me. They happen on at least a kind of regular basis.
Yeah, and up until this point, we've been here since 21. Up until this point, the longest power outage that we had was about 28 hours, and it was because of a tree that came down on the power line and ripped the transformer, it snapped the pole, and set the transformer on the ground.
Okay, so but up until this point, 28 hours was the longest.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so now during the storm, when it when it first got going good, I know you've sent me some pictures and some video both, and I'll try to overlay some of that in the video. What was it like to go through that? What kind of winds were you experiencing at your house? I believe in one of the clips you sent me, I saw some trees where you filmed them literally as they fell.
Yeah, so I was out having coffee on the front porch and letting the dogs out, and I heard the wind come up, so I peeked around the corner, and just happened to catch those two trees as they came down. Those two trees, we had a lot of trees come down. The whole top of mountains here are basically leveled. It looks like field artillery hit them.
Wow.
Um, um, but the tree that you're speaking about in the video, when it came down, it took out my disc cone and my Yagi and my element for my infed.
Oh,
Um, so yeah, and it didn't stop. There, it just kept coming, tree after tree, and every time a tree hit the ground, it would shake the whole house. Um,
wow.
so no, my wife wasn't here. She had been down in the Charlotte area taking her dad to some doctor's appointments and wasn't able to get back up here before the flooding started on Thursday, the 26th. Um, so me and the fur babies, we went to the basement, and every time the wind would calm down, I'd go back upstairs, get ham gear out of the shack, and bring it down to the basement. And we basically stayed in the basement. We didn't lock ourselves in, but we lived in the basement for about 2 days until I felt sure that more trees were not going to come down. But my first indication that there was a problem was about 5 o'clock in the morning. I use a CPAP, and about 5 o'clock in the morning, I had no air because the power went out. So uh, didn't think anything about it. Went back to sleep. Got the dogs got me up around 7 o'clock like they normally do, and let them out. And that's when we saw the results of the wind and the tornadoes. And that was a confirmed tornado that was uh, filmed and spotted by other neighbors back up in the holler.
Oh, wow. So you're dealing with the rain, the hurricane force winds, and then a tornado on top of that.
Yes, sir.
Wow, that's quite the combination that Mother Nature threw at you. Now, I'm hoping none of those trees landed on the house.
We had one that landed on the house, and it put two limbs through the back porch roof, but nothing penetrated the dwelling of the home.
Oh, well, that's good. That's
So
definitely good news.
yeah, and uh, the only other damage we had here uh, was some water that seeped into the basement, and so we're having to do some demolition in the basement bedroom and treat for mold.
Okay, but still, from the sounds of it, not near as bad as it could have been.
No, I mean there's people that lost their homes and lost their lives, so we're very blessed where we are.
Awesome, awesome. So now you said you stayed in the basement for a couple of days, and then there was another point you said that it took down several of your antennas. Did it take down all of your antennas for radio?
Uh, another anomaly. Okay, I bought a Chameleon 2040 fan dipole back during COVID, and I never put it up. I never used it, and I injured my foot. I'm waiting to have surgery, and I injured my foot a couple months ago, and I was just playing around because at the house because I couldn't really get do any parks on the so I 40 dipole on. I I put a pull on the pole up front. I ran a flagpole, and it just happened to be up when the storm came, and it remained up. That was the only antenna that I had in the air.
Okay, we had a little
So
bit of a glitch in the audio there. So you put you had a pulley on top of the flagpole. Was that correct?
yeah, I put a pulley on the flagpole on a piece of PVC pipe to get it away from the main pole,
Okay.
and it that I had that up for a couple of weeks before the storm. Well, that's the only antenna that I still had in the air after the storm went through.
Wow. Wow.
Uh, and I wanted to get, I mentioned earlier I was getting my gear from the ham shack and taking it downstairs. I run an IC 7200 in the shack, which has an integrated sound card. And one of my failures was I had bought a lithium battery during the last Prime days,
Mm-hmm.
but I had no cables connected to it. So
Oh,
I
so you
had
just
to
had a
go
raw
find,
battery.
yeah, just a raw battery that was charged.
Okay.
So I had to go find cable. I had to find my power pole connectors. I had to find my crimper because I was not organized in that manner. Now, when I go out to do parks on the air, I grab a 891 or 857 and I just hit the road. I don't normally have to use a computer. This is the reason I needed all these things because I needed to be able to communicate to my wife that I was alive and well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I got the cables on the battery, and a couple of weeks before the storm, you put out a letter or I don't know if it was a letter or a comment on a video about a 12-volt monitor, and I thought, I need to order one of those, but I didn't. So uh, once everything got settled that first day in the afternoon, I got out one of my small generators and cranked it up to power the monitor that I have, and it had dirty power. You could see the noise in the waterfall on JS8. Yeah. So
So it wasn't an inverter type generator. It's the construction or the open frame type generator, right?
yes,
Okay.
yes, exactly. I won't mention any names, but it's a little 2300-watt generator.
Okay.
Um, that could be green.
Okay.
Uh, anyway, so that wasn't working. So I used to drive a 14 RAV4, and it didn't have an inverter in it. Well, I had at some point in time had gone into a Pilot truck stop and picked up a 300-watt inverter. So I dug that out. I already had Anderson power connectors on that, so I plugged it into my distribution, plug my monitor into the inverter, and then I was able to power everything up and bring up WinLink and send an email to my wife via WinLink and let her know that we were alive and well and but cut off.
Okay.
So
So
yeah,
WinLink for
that's
the win in that case.
yes, sir. And WinLink got a lot of messages out, or several messages out for neighbors in the area that were trying to reach relatives. And one particular case, there was a neighbor who had just been to Florida and brought his mom up, and she was at an Airbnb in Burnsville, about 30 minutes away, waiting to go to an assisted living home in Boone,
Wow.
and he couldn't reach her. There was no way that we had no egress. Um, the road here was packed with trees. It took about 2 days to cut out the trees, and then once we got the trees cut, we reached the North Toe River and North Carolina 197. Well, it was under North Carolina 197 was under 3 to 10 feet of mud,
Mm.
and if the road was even existing, in many places, the road had washed away. So our land backs up to the Pisgah National Forest, and there's a road that goes from our holler over the mountain to an area called Poplar, North Carolina. And so we took about 3 days and cut all the trees out there so that we could have a path to get out and a path for emergency services to get in.
So they were going through the national forest and then across this road that crosses the mountain to your area.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Now,
Yeah.
and you said it took you about 3 days to get those trees clear. Was it just you doing that, or did you have help from neighbors? Or
Yeah, I was helping the neighbors. Like I said earlier, I've got an injured foot, so I'd work until I couldn't work no more, and then I'd come back and play on radios.
okay, I understand. Now let's back up for a second. That battery that you picked up, that you were running the radios off of, what size was that battery?
Mhm. It's 100 amp.
Okay, so you bought one of the
It,
big guys.
yep, I bought one of the big guys, and if I was just, I would send emails in the morning. WinLink, send emails in the morning and then the evening, and in the interim, I would just shut everything down,
Okay.
because I wasn't here to monitor anything.
Right.
So
So, did that battery, did you ever have to recharge the battery or did that last you the entire 22 days?
yeah, no, so that was an interesting, because I was checking I had a monitor, a voltage monitor on the battery,
Mhm.
and it was telling me it was 13 volts. And I took it out at one point and hooked it up to my solar panels, and it says full. Okay, brought it back in. About 2 hours later, it was gone, dead.
Oh,
I don't know. I don't know what happened there. Uh, so obviously, I put it back out in the yard on solar panels and let it charge up, um, um, until I had recently bought I used to have a 2 amp uh, charger, just a trickle charger to
mhm.
keep the batteries up, and it died. And I recently bought a 5 amp, and so I had to find that. And so whenever I was running the generator, which I only had a 120-volt generator, okay, which I had bought previously, or prior to Hurricane Florence back in 2018. Excuse me. Which was fine when we lived in the city, because I had a natural gas hot water heater. I was on city water. I didn't need to run a hot water heater or power a well. And so anyway, while the generator was running, I would charge batteries, and I have a backup battery for my CPAP, and I would charge that while the generator was running. Anything that needed charging was either connected to a solar panel that I already had, or it was connected to the generator uh, and recharged for that
O-
night or whatever activities I had that day.
Okay, so I take it from the way you're telling that you didn't run the generator around the clock. You just ran it for a period each day to recharge things.
Yes, and the main reason I was running it was because we have two refrigerators and one freezer. So I was uh, fortunately, we didn't lose any food.
Oh,
Uh,
that's good.
yeah, so I was able to keep everything cold, and it may not have been completely frozen, but it didn't, it never got below 35 degrees, 40 degrees, something like that.
Okay. So, the generator, you said this is a smaller generator that only had 110 power, correct?
That's correct.
And I heard you
Yeah,
mention
so
some. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
the first week, uh, I had mentioned before, my wife was down east in Charlotte. Um, the first week, that's what I ran off of, and I used camp stove propane heater on front porch to heat water uh, with, and to bathe with. I did the bathtub full of water so I could flush toilets, and could also use that for cooking water after boiling. And in addition to that, I had filled up a couple of 5 gallon water coolers with drinking water before the storm. And we also have a Berkey water filter. I'm not sure if I mentioned that. I had plenty of drinking water on hand, but no way to heat water. So a couple of days into it, um, one of the neighbors had Starlink before the storm. Excuse me. And she opened that up to everyone in the holler to use. Um, one of my neighbors, landowners, who is a neighbor and friend, but he lives in Toledo, Ohio, got a hold of me, and he had taken a shed and made a camping cabin out of it that had an on-demand propane hot water heater. And so he texted me and said, Dean, go cut the locks on that so that anybody that needs to get a shower can do so, because it's fed off of spring water.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so we hooked up a hose on the hose bib outside so we could fill containers with the spring water, and we could take a hot shower. Uh, and it was completely enclosed. He's even got a bathroom door with a lock on it. And so we were able to take hot showers over there after a couple of days. Uh, after after a week, my wife uh, left Charlotte, and you couldn't get directly to this area. Normally, we would go up I-40 to Marion and then come up the mountain to Green Mountain, but you couldn't get there. So
Okay.
she left Charlotte, went up to Whitfield, Virginia on 77, jumped on 81, came back down through Bristol to Johnson City.
Hmm.
By that time, local guys with heavy equipment had built a one-lane road around the bridge, around the river, so that we could get over to Tennessee, to Irwin and Johnson City. And uh, so I went over to Johnson City and met her. I think that was Friday or Saturday after the storm, and we picked up a new generator in Johnson City that had 240-volt output, and brought that home. And one of the big struggles that we had during during the whole thing when the power was out was everything seemed to take so much longer. Uh, what should have taken an hour to connect the generator to the breaker panel, it took half a day.
Right.
And the previous owner had started to put in a circuit for a generator, and he had basically a three-prong plug on the outside of the house for the generator hookup, but he never connected it to the breaker panel. The cable was run, the breaker was there, but it was never connected.
Hmm.
Now, I'm an electronics technician by trade.
Okay.
Why I did this, I don't know. I honestly can't tell you. I have no logical reason for doing this, but I did it anyway. The cable was connected to the receptacle outside. I was in and I pulled the breaker panel off, and my wife was outside and she touched two of the wires. I plugged in the dryer cable and touched two of the wires together and checked it, and they were shorted. Okay, we have the correct cable. I said, go ahead, and we're talking on radios back and forth on little Baofeng BF 888s. I said, go ahead and swap to the other cable. She swaps to the other cable, and it was also shorted. I said, okay, separate all three cables. They were still shorted. They shouldn't have been shorted. So I go outside to the receptacle and take it apart. And when the receptacle was in a metal box, aluminum box, and it was grounded. And when put the screws in the cover, whoever did it ran the screw right through one of the hot wires. So the first
Oh.
so the first thing I had to do was make a repair there before I could do anything else. Um, but we were able to get everything connected, hook it up to a breaker, turn off the main, because all the power cables, utilities, all the infrastructure was gone. Everything was laying on the ground. So we turned off the main breaker, powered the circuit breaker box with the generator, and uh, we we could run the refrigerators and the freezer, and we could turn on the well, and then we would turn on the well first and fill the hot water heater. Once the hot water heater was full, and I knew it was because I had a clamp on amp meter hanging on the breaker, so I knew when it was full and it stopped heating. We would turn off the hot water heater and then turn on the well, and then you could take a hot shower.
So a bit of juggling.
It was a lot of juggling.
Things we don't even think about, we just take for granted on a day-to-day basis.
No, exactly, and uh, it was definitely a challenge. So during this time, I mentioned that we got the generator. Well, a couple of days later, my neighbor and friend Tim came from Toledo with three solar generators and 400 watts solar panels to go with each generator for whoever needed them, right?
Nice.
And it was very nice. So what we did was we were running a generator anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
We plug the anchor into the house power, and if the when we cut the generator off or it ran out of gas, the anchor was now acting as a USB, uninterrupted power supply. So we had the refrigerator plugged into it, and we had a couple of lamps, and of course, power to my monitor for the ham shack. So, and it after the power came back on, we the generator's still hooked up. We just turned the breaker off um, because we expect the power to go back down again. And this is no fault of French Broad or anything. It's just nature. Trees are going to come down.
Right.
So we kept things plugged into the USB for. Well, we still have lamps, a couple things plugged into the USB, and we also have the solar panels still sitting outside connected to the solar generator, just in case we needed it.
So it sounds like you started off with that small generator, that 110. That's obviously not enough to run the well pump. But you had kind of taken that into account and had drinking water that carried you through that first week. And then by the time your wife got back and you guys got the bigger generator, you were able to basically feed not everything at once, but you were able to at least feed electricity to everything you needed, even though you had to kind of go through some power management to make that happen.
That's correct. So we would each morning we would one of us would start the generator, the other one would be down at the breaker box, and we would basically turn off anything that required 220,
Mm-hmm.
start the generator, and then we would bring circuits up one at a time so that we didn't put too much inrush or surge on the generator.
Do you have any idea how much gas you were going through on a day-to-day basis running the generators?
We were going through at least 5 gallons a day, 5 to 8 gallons a day.
Okay. And how much did
Uh,
you said you had kind of been preparing for winter anyway before this hit. So how much gas do you normally have on hand to get you through a winter?
uh, we normally have 25 gallons on hand,
Okay.
and obviously that didn't last. We that didn't last very long. Um, what occurred was volunteers started showing up with supplies and gasoline, and the road I mentioned through the Pisgah National Forest. Uh, we had volunteers coming from the Poplar Community Center, where uh, and Bradshaw Fire Department in Tipton Hill, where some people in Tennessee had donated gasoline, and they would. I'm I had just filled up my generator and started it. And this was day 3 or 4. Uh, and a couple of guys pulled up in a pickup truck, and I'm sitting at the window. After we moved back upstairs, for security reasons, I set up a desk in the living room so that I could see the road, because we did have verified reports of a thief in the area that was breaking into churches and stealing things that uh, uh, had any value. Right? Um, he was that person, as I understand, was uh, located by Ohio military police that were in the area,
Good.
and was dealt with.
Good.
Uh, but for security reasons, I moved up, so that I could see out the front windows and see who was coming and going up and down the road. And these two guys come pulling up in a pickup truck with a trailer full of 5-gallon gas cans. And they said, "Hey, we're going to top off your generator." I said, "Well, it's already full. I just started it, but thanks." And they said, "Well, then bring us some empty cans." So I brought my empty cans. They filled up my empty gas cans, and went on their way. And about every other day, they would come by and fill up empty cans, or fill up the generator, one of the two.
Oh man, that's awesome. So you never
Yeah.
had to venture out and try to hunt gasoline or anything like that.
We, when we were over, if we went out to Johnson City or Irwin, then we would take our empty cans and uh, either exchange them at one of the local areas that had gasoline available. And if they had no gasoline and we were already in Johnson City or Irwin, then we would go ahead and fill up there.
Okay. Now, did you run into any issues trying to get gas? I've heard some stories, especially listening to Dan on that Mount Mitchell repeater, where stations could only accept cash because they didn't have a way to process cards. Did you run into any of that personally?
Uh, No, sir. And the reason is I didn't leave here until a week after the storm. And by then everything in well, I say everything, most everything in Johnson City and the north part of Irwin and Unicoi was already up and running. So they had their internet, they had power. So we personally didn't have to deal with any of that.
Okay. Good. Good. Well,
But when my wife was coming up from Charlotte, I did have her pull cash out of the bank, so that we would have cash on hand when she got here. I had a couple of $100 here at the house, but we wanted to have additional funding just in case we needed it.
right. Right. So, looking back, now that you're on the other side of this, what would you have done differently, just to kind of be more prepared for this situation?
Uh, that's a great question. Obviously, organization. Uh, keep keep all your things organized. Keep your tools in one location. Um, have extra wire, cable, and connectors on hand. Um, this sounds odd, but dish towels. You know, we use a dishwasher.
Yeah,
We're
true.
not normally washing dishes, right? So,
True.
um, I found very quickly that uh, small towels, dish towels was something that was important. And um, gosh, I'm not I'm not sure what else that you kind of caught me off guard. I should have been prepared for that question.
Well,
Uh,
obviously, you would have probably had more gasoline had you have known it was going to go on for 22 days. And you would have probably had a bigger generator already, that could provide you with that 220 power necessary to at least run the well.
yes, and so one of the things was that when my battery went dead, I had another battery, but it was out in the barn. I had it out there to. I normally have a mesh. Well, we have a mesh router
Mm-hmm.
and two extenders. So I had a battery and a small solar panel out in the barn, roughly about 100 yards away from the house. So we would have internet out in the yard for Wi-Fi calling if we're out there working.
Mm-hmm.
Because where we live, we don't have any cell phone signal. So uh, internet and ham radio is the only communication that we had at the time. Um, I'm able to do this interview with you this morning because we were gifted a uh, a mini Starlink just a couple of maybe 10 days ago.
Okay.
So I got to tell this. Um, there was a gentleman in the area. His name's Colt. He was a volunteer from Alabama, uh, down near Birmingham, and uh, he was in the area. And I saw a post on Facebook where he needed to take a shower, and so I got his contact information, drove to the area where he was, and found him, introduced myself, showed him the pictures of the shower that we had available. And by this time, we had the larger generator, and my wife was here, and he said, "Well, can you guys wash some clothes for me?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And he says, "And I only brought two pair of pants, and I caught some rebar and tore one on. Does your wife sew?" And I said, so washed the clothes for him, and we got a neighbor to mend the trousers, and of course he got a shower, and we fed him while he was here waiting on his clothes. A couple days later, he came by and wanted to say goodbye, and he said, "I just wanted to say thanks. And here's a mini Starlink." He said, "You guys can use it. I don't need it where I'm going." And he was going
Wow.
back home. And so that's how I'm able to do the interview with you this morning.
What an awesome story. Will you be keeping service on that Starlink going forward?
Most likely, yes. Now, French Broad Electric maintains the power here. I mentioned that. We had a different internet provider before the storm.
Mm-hmm.
And just 2 days ago, French Broad was, well, let me back up. A couple of months before the storm, French Broad had run fiber optic cable on the mountain. And of course, all that came down. Well, 2 days ago, French Broad pulled up in the yard and they ran new fiber optic cable. So we will probably be signing on with French Broad and keeping the Starlink as a backup.
Okay. Yep. Definitely a good plan to have two sources of internet available to you.
Yeah, most definitely. And uh, so in the beginning, when the storm first hit, uh, I have a neighbor that has his technician license, but he never did anything with it. And so he contacted me. He came by and said, "Hey, is there any way that you can help me out with programming my radios and this and that?" So we got his radios programmed so that he could communicate on the Mount Mitchell repeater. And I had a extra J pole that was here at the house, so we rigged that up on a piece of fence post and attached it to his house. So he had an external antenna so that he could communicate on the repeater, hear what was going on, and then also communicate with me. Um, and I'm not sure where I was going with that.
Well, I'm curious now. So that's kind of what I call community comms. You guys were both, I'm assuming, listening to the Mount Mitchell repeater. How did you communicate with one another? Were you able to use simplex for that?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So that that's a great question. So when the storm first occurred and I had my radio set up, I had the 7200 set up for HF, and I had my 857 um, for communicating on the Mount Mitchell repeater. After the same neighbor helped me get we repaired the Yagi and gutted it up in the air. The disc cone was bent 90 degrees, the element on the top of it. So, and it wasn't getting good SWR. So, we got the Yagi up in the air and got it pointed toward Mount Mitchell. And, so we got that up and running after we got his antenna, up in the air. And we're the only two licensed hams in the area, but we have this is an emergency situation, and we had a lot of neighbors that had Baofeng, so we were able to program FRS on those, and we also had the Baofeng BF 888s that were being donated, but they
Mm-hmm.
all weren't on the same frequencies, right? So I uploaded the program from one radio, and then we programmed every radio the same, so that all the neighbors up and down the holler could communicate.
Okay.
Um,
So you were
at
able to
that,
basically build out community comms just with the radios you scrounged up.
yes, sir. I had 6 here on hand, and then we had more that were being 6 of the 888s. I had those here on hand, and a couple UV82s, Baofangs, and then a Yaesu FT4X, and a couple Anytones.
Okay.
And then some of the other neighbors already had UV5Rs. So we got everybody on the same frequency. And the 857 is a great radio, but I'm not that familiar with it. I just bought it at used at Hamvention
Okay.
in Dayton, and so prior to that, and the same thing I run in my truck, I broke out a TYT TH 9800. That's a knockoff of the Yaesu 8900. All
Right.
right, and it has um, uh, A channel and B channel, so you can monitor two different frequencies. So I would have it set to monitor Mount Mitchell, and then the other side of the radio, I had it monitoring the local comps.
Okay. All right. Sounds like you guys built out a pretty good system then, just utilizing what you had on hand.
Yes, sir. Yeah,
Good
and
deal.
then as I mentioned, I don't know where those radios came from, but we more BF 888s were being donated. Um, who knows where they came from? And then my neighbor Tim, when he came from Toledo, Ohio, he brought 10 UV5Rs. So that added to our collection that we already had.
And I'm going to guess that you were using Chirp to program all of these radios.
Yes, sir.
Good deal. Good deal. Yep, I'm a big fan of Chirp. The only thing that you got to make sure of is you got the right programming cable. But typically, when you get into the Baofeng line, those all pretty much take the same cable.
That's correct. The Yaesu has a different cable, and uh, Anytone 878 that uses a different software and a different cable altogether. Um, but I have those. I keep those in a bag that usually stay with me or in my vehicle uh, most of the time.
So, a point I want to bring up here is without your skill set of being able to program the radios and without having Chirp already downloaded and ready to go, a lot of this would have been maybe not impossible, but would have taken quite a bit more time to try to program all of those radios. So it's something I really try to drive home. The point of is having this software available to you and knowing how to use it to do these things. Because otherwise, that radio is not much use if you can't get it set up on the right frequency.
Yeah, that's correct. And one of the other things I failed to mention earlier was that I had a different laptop that I used to use for ham radio for portable operations, and uh, it was bricked. I don't know what I did to it, but I had turned it into a brick. Well, a neighbor friend of mine is an IT computer type person. I gave it to him, and he got it back up and running. But I had all intentions on putting all my ham software back on that radio. He wasn't able to save any of the programs or anything that was on it. Um, I didn't have it loaded,
Mm.
which is, so I only had my Shack radio, and my Shack radio is a Chewy Lark box that runs on a little Ice Cube computer that runs on 12 volts. And so that's what I run in the shack 100% of the time. And today, the monitor that you recommended, the 12-volt monitor that you recommended, my wife ordered, and we were able to get that up here. So everything in the shack now runs on 12 volts.
I'll leave a link to that monitor down in the description. That's the same one running right back here
Yes,
that you
sir.
see over my shoulder. Once I ran across that, I was very happy knowing that I could power a monitor with just 12 volts. So I use it as an external monitor for my laptop. So I've got dual screens here in the shack. But yeah, I've run that now for probably 18 months or so, and I've been really pleased with that monitor, and being able to power it on 12 volts. To me, that's a huge bonus.
Yeah, it's been great, and I didn't realize that my battery charger, once the battery is complete and is charged, it turns off.
Yes.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
And so uh yesterday I'm sitting here, and I was or 2 days ago I was running JS8, and I noticed that my display on the rig was getting dim. And I looked over and saw I had 10.3 volts.
Oh,
So obviously I stopped my transmission, but everything was still on. The 12-volt monitor was still on. I don't recommend running that voltage low, but it was still on. The radio was still on, and so I put everything in receive only and turned on the battery charger and rectified that situation.
good deal. Good deal. Yeah, lithium iron phosphate doesn't require a trickle charge like the old SLA and AGM batteries did. So a lot of those chargers, once the battery is topped off, they will just disconnect. Not all of them do
Mhm.
that, but a lot of them do operate that way. Well, Dean, I greatly appreciate the time this morning. Is there anything I missed that you want to get out there before we wrap this up?
Uh, I would say that a couple of things that we need to have. You've mentioned before and put the links up, uh, but
Oh,
these
yep,
little connectors,
yep.
yeah,
Those are the
these,
Wago or Wago or something like that to power pole.
yep, those came in handy. Well, I had another ham come up to help me, and we needed to order out something I don't on radio, but we used that. Um, keep a
Wait a minute,
rig.
you broke up just a little bit right there. You had another ham to come up and what?
I had another ham in the area, and we needed to power something, and we used that to do it
Oh,
because he
okay,
didn't have power poles on the end of it.
gotcha.
Um, One thing I forgot to mention earlier, and I apologize. Uh, the the first morning of the storm, my antennas got taken out. Right, and so I need to get on local comms. I will need to be able to hear what's going on Mount Mitchell, repeater into GE, and but I didn't have an antenna for the house that I could do that. So what I ended up doing was we have some um, TV trays, the old fashioned metal
Hmm.
trays that you could set your plate on while you're and eat while you're watching TV. Again, they're metal. So I took one of those and I went out to my side by side and grabbed a mag mount, brought it in, put it on the metal tray, stuck it outside the window, and closed the window on it. And that was my antenna for a couple of days until I could get something in the air.
Hey, if it
Uh,
works, it works.
that's right, but multiple antennas. I also have a roll up J pole, but I didn't want to put that out. I didn't need to because I had other opportunities, other alternatives. Uh, have extra gear. Uh, two is one and one is none. You
Absolutely.
know, don't just depend on one antenna for a specific frequency. So I've got you. Redundancy is the big thing. Um, I've got the Chameleon 2040 fan dipole. I've also got the Chameleon Impasse 2.0, and I recently bought a end-fed half wave from Chameleon. So I've
Okay.
got multiple HF antennas, and then uh, for VHF UHF, I have several mag mounts and roll up J pole and extra coax. That's one thing that um, right now I'm only running a Yagi outside because I set up my friend with an antenna at his house. Um, but I only had two pieces of LMR 400. So I took one of my antennas down, took the coax off of that, and set Ron up at his house. Uh, because as you know, UHF and VHF, you have to have really good cable because there's a lot of line loss there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, definitely having spare parts and pieces on hand um, to be able to build antennas or to make repairs to cable. There's a lot of different uses for just having extra parts on hand.
Yeah, absolutely. Heat shrink, soldering irons, propane or butane fired soldering irons, because which I did have to use uh, because you may not have power. All right.
That's a good point.
So
Really good point.
yeah, so I keep a butane soldering iron in my kit just in case I'm somewhere where I don't have power and I need to make a connection, which I did use it doing the repair on the 220 line.
Good deal. All right, man, I greatly, greatly appreciate you taking a few minutes with me this morning. I think there's going to be a lot to learn out of this and will maybe help someone else in their preparation in case they live in areas like you do or like I do, where hurricanes and tornadoes are unfortunately an all too common occurrence.
Mm, yeah, exactly. And winter's coming,
That's
and
right.
all the signs indicate that we're going to have a harsh winter this year. So what we're telling everybody, uh, the supplies and donations that are coming in uh, or have come in, our our local fire department look like a Walmart.
Wow.
It really did.
Wow.
From anything from Q-tips to kerosene heaters, including fuel, diesel, gas, kerosene,
What a
and
blessing.
it was a great blessing. The only thing we've had to really go out and get was, and we didn't have to do anything. We had food in the freezer. Was to go out and get fresh meat.
Yeah.
You um, and we didn't do that until just a few days ago. So, but in what was being said to the people was, hey, take get what you need. And Appalachians are and hill people are proud people. And they would say, "Oh, I'm fine. I'm good. I don't need anything." And we were in church one morning, and the pastor said, "Hey, get what you need." And I said, I need to interrupt you. I need to correct your statement. I said, "Everybody here is probably good right now, but get what you need for a month. Go get food, stock it up, put it away, put it in your pantry for a month, because winter is coming, and it's going to be a harsh winter, and you may have a blizzard. You may not be able to get out. So prepare for the future, not for right now. Prepare for the future."
Absolutely. Absolutely. Man, that's a great place to end this. Dean, thank you so much. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you found the information useful, be sure to give us a thumbs up before you head off. We will see you guys on the next one. Until then, 7-3.